welcome everybody to the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I have the great privilege today of being joined by Wyndham Wallace. Wyndham is a Berlin-based writer whose critically acclaimed first book, Lee, Myself and I, about his friendship with Lee Hazelwood, the man behind These Boots Are Made for Walking, was published in 2015. He began his career as a music publicist in the mid-90s, before running City Slang Records' UK office for 8 years, but now works as a music critic for, amongst others, Uncut and Classic Pop, and he can be seen fronting Almost Fashionable, a film about Travis, which won the Edinburgh Film Festival Audience Award. In 2024, Wyndham helped lead a number of victims of child sexual abuse over 3 decades to a public settlement with Horace Hill Prep School, which he'd attended in the early 1980s. Thanks very much for joining us, Wyndham.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Chris.
Oh, no worries. It's been a year coming, this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to it. I was also really blown away by your podcast with Piers Cross on his Evolving Man podcast. So I knew that we had to have a chat, and it was actually through one of our other directors, Toby, that we got to know each other, wasn't it?
It was indeed. Actually, Toby is a member of one of the boarding school survivors groups that I'm part of, and we came across one another there, and he was very kind to give me some advice very, very early on in the sort of process of awakening that I underwent over the last 5 years. So I'm enormously grateful to him, and also to all of you guys as well. Generally, like, you're doing fine work.
Thank you, Wyndham. That was really kind. Yeah, really appreciate that, and I've very much appreciated your input over the last year. Particularly with your journey, and I know you've been very vocal about how things were for you at school, about gathering other people who've been through similar experiences, and I'm trying to hold the schools and the institutions accountable, which I have a great deal of respect for. So thank you for your work. But yeah, as I always like to do at the podcast, is to kind of begin at the beginning. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how things were for you when you were young. So, before school, how school was for you. It really helps us to understand kind of where you came from.
I grew up in a family that sort of falls on that line between upper class and upper middle class. My father was a military officer. I don't think I was overly privileged, but certainly was surrounded by people with privilege, and we, circulated amongst privilege without really understanding it. Consequently, I had a pretty decent early life. I mean, I have to say we had, a beautiful house for a while. We traveled a bit because of my father's posting. So I lived in Colchester, in Northern Ireland, in Cambridge, in Camberley, as well as in our own house in Hampshire. And I have only really very, very good memories of those early years. It was a pretty wonderful part of my life. And I pretty much think of my life as a sort of before and after, with mid-September 1979 marking that point, which being the time I went to Horace Hill.
And how old were you when you went to Horace Hill?
I had turned 8 2 months earlier, which is a very, very young age, I think, to be parted from one's parents, especially when one really is too young to understand what is going on or why, because the chasm between the reality that you've been sold about why you're going to that school, and then the reality that you find when you get there is pretty baffling, shall we say? And the people who've always been there on hand to explain to you what is going on in your life when perhaps it's been challenging are no longer there. So yeah, that was a turning point for me. But those first 8 years were just brilliant. I'd have liked to have seen a bit more of my dad, perhaps, because he was always so busy. I'd have liked to have spent less time in the garden with my mother. And, she was the one that told me my imaginary friend didn't, exist in real life. But, those were the greatest challenges I faced as a kid, I think. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Wyndham. I could kind of have quite a visual memory. I can see the garden, I can see Mum, and yeah. So, was your family a boarding school family? Was that in the culture?
Yes, very much so. I mean, my mother's brothers, I think, had all been to Eton. My father was educated at Shrewsbury. Two uncles had gone to Radley College, where I would move when I was 13. I, to be honest, didn't realize there was any other kind of option. It kind of felt very much like, you know, this is what you do. Others don't do it, but you're lucky. So, yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, you made this the point so well that 8 years old, or even until much older, a young person really has no feel for the consequences of something. So often we hear quite a lot, well, I chose to go to boarding school. Ultimately, at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you can make the choice, but you don't fully comprehend the impact of that decision and what happens inside when you're suddenly not with your caregivers. So as you said, you sort of nothing could prepare you for what happened next, even though it was the way you did things.
No, it's a bit like, I don't know where I just got this idea from, but it's a bit like, it reminds me of when I went to Lyon once and I ordered a meal with a sausage on it. It looked fantastic. It was described beautifully and I couldn't resist. And then when it turned up, it was awful. So yeah, that's just not that different, really. I didn't know what the French for awful was, and at 8 years old, I didn't know really what was going on with all sorts of things.
No, indeed. And so as you started to get ready in the summer of 79, you're heading off to your first prep school. Were you excited? Was this kind of just a done thing, or were you starting to get that sense of, hang on a minute, things are really going to change?
I think I was probably genuinely excited. I think there was no doubt a certain degree of trepidation in there as well. I mean, I'd been invited, I think, a year or so too earlier to go on holiday with my neighbors and their son, who was my best friend at the time, and I'd cancelled the night before because I was so scared of being away from my parents. So there was definitely an anxiety about it. But I knew this was going to be, or I thought this was going to be a tremendous horizon broadening experience with all sorts of opportunities that was going to set me on a path to a life that would match my father's. And my father was, my idol. He'd been through the same system. My mother had been through, the same system as well. So yeah, largely it was, I couldn't wait to get there, and the truth of the matter is it only took about an hour before I realized, oh God, this is not what I thought. We'd been, all of us, all the parents and kids, new boys had been invited into, have drinks with the headmaster upon arrival. We were then, as young kids, encouraged to go and have a look around the school with somebody else. And when we came back, our parents had gone. We hadn't said goodbye. We hadn't been told this was happening. And although, the phrase, tearing a plaster off is often used in these circumstances, I mean, that is brutal. That is absolutely brutal. And I think of that as an unforgivable moment that left a permanent scar upon me. And also, I think, gave more than a bit of a wobble to my idea of reality, because nothing I was seeing around me within the first hour matched what I expected. It was also the moment I learned my first lesson at prep school, which is arguably one of the most important lessons you learn when you go to prep school, if not a useful one. Depends what your role in life is, but I learned to lie. Are you okay, Wallace? Yes, sir, I'm fine. That's the first thing I learned. Don't tell him the truth. So, yeah, my trepidation proved to be the more powerful feeling that first day, and I think everything changed at that moment, that very first moment. So the reality was not what I had understood. I had not been fully informed to make that decision. And in all honesty, any sense of agency I had was pretty much an illusion. It was not a, malevolent illusion provided by my parents, but it was an illusion. I think they too perhaps had forgotten just how difficult it can be to be separated from your parents at the age of 8, under any circumstances.
Thank you, Wyndham. Yeah, so powerful words then. Thinking of the ABCD of Joyce Chevron's work, abandonment, bereavement, captivity, dissociation for boarding school syndrome. And ultimately, as you say, the parents who've been through the system themselves, they would have had to have done their own dissociating, surviving to come out, and then by the time they get to adulthood and have children of their own, it's just the way things were done. It's the way we do things around here, and business as usual. So they sort of pack their children off, and many of those things that they will credit their lives to, whether it's your father's career or sort of family success stuff, they'll credit that back to the school again. So it's providing that opportunity for their children often.
And they have to. I think in many ways they have to credit it back to that childhood experience, because that's the foundation of their entire life ethos. So if you take away the possibility that this awful experience, or maybe it wasn't so awful because it isn't for everybody, but if you take away the possibility that that experience provided you with everything that you needed so that you could now succeed and have a happy family, then it kind of shakes your entire life. So you've got to hold that in place. Otherwise, what do you put there? There isn't an alternative structure if that's the life you've grown up in. It's very difficult to adapt.
Very much so. And you point to your first lesson as well. So your first lesson being how to lie, and certainly how to tell people you're fine when you're not.
That lying I think is one of the most fundamental difficulties for most children who've come from a boarding school environment, because it becomes so fundamentally important to your survival. And the problem is, as we may discuss in more depth later, I don't know, but problem is it's a habit that's quite hard to break once it has served you well. So even for those of us who protect ourselves emotionally by lying to ourselves, we're not doing ourselves any favor. And there are those who I would argue emerged from this kind of society and continued lying because it had never done them any harm, but they started to do it in a manner which harmed others.
Yeah, we'll definitely come on to the kind of the wounded leaders and some of the things the system has produced. But I want to stay with you then. So once you've got to your first prep school, just perhaps first prep school, senior school, what were some of the key memories, the key experiences that really sort of shaped it for you?
At my prep school, a feeling of absolute failure. I think that is the defining emotion that I emerged with, that I wasn't inadequate, that I was not good enough, that everything I set out to do, I fell short of the goals that were expected of me. There's a remarkable, there were 2 reports that I read from my prep school, from Horace Hill not so long ago. The first suggests that I need to build my self-confidence and learn to assert myself more. The following term, I'm accused of being arrogant and thinking that I know it all. Now, it may well be that in trying to assert myself, I had become smug, but I don't think smug is really the right word. I think I was just not guided as to where the line lay, because the examples that were being given to me were so ambiguous. I felt like I was never good enough. I was a largely A-grade student. I did well at music. I led the school choir by the time I'd left. But by the time I got to my public school, I couldn't leave a room without standing outside and trying to hear what was being said, because I was so paranoid that I couldn't trust even my friends. and what they were saying behind my back. And that came from that first 5-year experience of total lack of faith in myself. And that never left me, I don't think. I've managed to get on top of it now, but every album review I write, I must read like 15 times before I send it off, even if it's just 100 words, because I fear what are the consequences going to be if I've said something dumb, or I've misspelt a word, or it doesn't read well, because I'm probably not good enough to be doing this job. There's not many music journalists left. I'll be the next to go. That's that experience of getting an A grade and then being told, well, yeah, you didn't come first, did you? I think about the fact that I was the third 11 goalkeeper. The third 11 goalkeeper, which meant that I was not in the first 11 or the second 11, as far as most people were concerned, as opposed to the fact that I was the third best goalkeeper in a school of 150 people. Now, I know there's not that many people who want to be a goalkeeper, but where was the person saying, well done, the third best goalkeeper in the school? But no, I just wasn't good enough to be in the first or the second 11. That's pretty awful. It ruined my enjoyment of the sport. There's another thing that was in one of my reports. Sometimes Wyndham gets a bit ahead of himself. He certainly thinks he's better at football than he really is. I mean, why do you need to say that? What good can that possibly do to a child except kill his enthusiasm? Unless you are so confident that it drives you to greater heights and to try and improve. But when you've been told you're pretty poor, you're just saying, well, I'm not going to embarrass myself anymore. I'm just going to try and hide in the corner and not draw attention to myself.
Yeah, thank you, Wyndham. It's really heartbreaking, and it rings really true with me. And I think that some of the things you touched on there, the kind of imposter syndrome that can stay with you, and they'll catch me out, they'll find me out at any moment. I'm just winging this, So I've certainly struggled with that in my life, and I hear it a lot in the Seaman Head groups.
I think it's important to add, by the way, that these are not unique to boarding school experiences. It's really important that people understand that, we're not saying that we're the only people that go through this and everybody else has, had an easy life. That's not the case at all. It's just that this is an environment, certainly back in my era, which was specifically designed in order to do this. We talk about breaking horses. We were being broken as children. That was part of the entire structure. We would then be rebuilt in their image, but we were being broken. That's not healthy. And when you can't get out of a school at the end of a day and go and see your mum or dad and say, look, they said I was really, really bad at football, but I'm the third best goalkeeper in the school. You kind of miss that moment when your mum puts her arm around you and goes, you are the third best keeper in the school. Don't listen to them.
Yeah, that really gets me right there, because that's part of the challenge of it, isn't it? The captivity element is you can't get out, you can't get away, you can't share that. As you say, systemically, it was very much set up. I mean, I went through in the late 80s and 90s. Your report cards could have been cardboard. They probably photocopied them from mine. It was, the constant ranking. I hear a lot from people, so from boys and girls, all types of different schools, and it's still happening today. And the burnout, the nothing is ever good enough, the incredible timetabling of everything, just sort of moving you from one thing to the next, remains. So although there has been an awful lot of really positive change that we welcome, whether it's improvements in safeguarding or that it's become a warmer environment and kids are allowed to contact home more often, all these things that the schools will talk about and many people will talk about, and many of them are true. But ultimately, if you can't go home and talk to someone, if there's no appropriate touch and love in the environment, and if fundamentally it's set up to create a product and an output, then there will always be the most important bit missing, which is that emotional core. Yeah. Thank you. And so, moving through Radley, moving through Horace Hill towards Radley Senior School, was there anything else from that era, before we look at how things have been since, that you wanted to talk about that you wanted to explore a bit?
I think that I would need to mention that there's more than one kind of abuse that is worthy of attention. When I moved to Radley, the abuse that I had faced at Horace Hill was transformed into a different kind. When I was at Horace Hill, I had problems with teachers. When I arrived at Radley, I struggled with boy-on-boy violence. There was an air of, I mean, inevitably the comparison is Lord of the Flies. I mean, that is the Bible of all of this. It was just an extraordinary environment in which the idea that you could all run ragged whilst teachers weren't around seemed like, drinking vodka. Like everybody was just drunk on this idea of causing pain or humiliation to others. And Radley is an extraordinary school in terms of what it offers you. I mean, we had a golf course. I mean, that mattered to me. How many people had a golf course in their school? But I also was, nearly deliberately drowned in a bath at 2 a.m. at night, then hung from the back of my pajamas from a coat hook with a broom handle through my, sleeve, so I couldn't get down. It's the only time I ever thought I was going to die. So I think that this boy-on-boy violence is also underrated, shall we say, in terms of the damage it does. And all I can say is that by the time I was about 16 or so, Radley had just knocked any joy out of me. I just was counting down the days to leave and get out of this environment and into a world that was not dangerous. It felt more dangerous to be at Radley than it did to be in the village outside, where sometimes the kids would throw stones at us because there were other Radleyans going down there and calling them plebs. I would rather been in the village. So yeah, that was my takeaway from Radley. It was like, what an extraordinarily violent place. And apparently that's okay. They called it a microcosm of society. Which to a degree I think it is, in the same way as Lord of the Flies is a microcosm of society. But I would point out that, most societies allow their parents to be a part of it. And most societies aren't male only. So we got a bit of a problem there, I think, in this being a microcosm of society, designed to prepare you for the rest of life. Well, only if you're going to spend that in a men's club.
Yeah, and then if you're going to spend it hypervigilant and waiting for the sword to drop at any moment, because ultimately that's the way your nervous system is programmed at that young age, and it takes decades to unprogram it, and often, like I did, you have to have a big breakdown first to kind of get there. But thank you for sharing for your experiences, and a couple of things you just point out, very, very important. Absolutely, sexual abuse in boarding schools was really prevalent for decades. But the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, and the neglect. And as we know, when it comes to complex post-traumatic stress, it's that day in, day out kind of fear, day in, day out, can't get away, that really sort of it does a number on you. And it's very important that you mentioned that. Yeah. So when it comes to pupil on pupil, or even on the sexual abuse side of things, there's the sort of classic, the teachers, you have to watch out for the teachers. But at many, particularly senior schools, it was pupil on pupil sexual abuse, or it was where it was apparently consensual, but actually there was a massive imbalance of power between a sixth former and a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old. These were called relationships and things like that. So there was a lot of weird stuff going on in boys' schools, girls' schools, mixed schools, where it was just not a very healthy environment to grow up in.
No, not healthy at all.
I hear you. So leaving, then coming out into the world, what were you carrying with you, and how did that shape what you went on to do for your life, for your work, your relationships, etc.?
It's funny because the moment I left Radley, I think I forgot about everything as fast as I could. I threw myself into a 6-month work experience job in an advertising agency. I traveled the world for 5 months. Then I went to university. To my, you know, in hindsight, to my great delight, I failed Oxbridge twice, which meant that I went to a smaller university, ironically filled with former boarding school people, Exeter University, but they tended to be a little bit less motivated, should we say, than an Oxbridge person, which meant that I was able to become a sort of bigger fish in the smaller pond. I think during that time, I don't know, it's just this question I've never really thought about that much, like how it affected me early on, because I didn't know it was affecting me, but I think it did really affect how I socialized, because I didn't really know how to do it. Firstly, I certainly didn't really know how to socialize with women. I mean, I was still a virgin when I arrived at Exeter University. I think I'd kissed 3 girls maybe by that point, because my parents had also lived abroad much of my teens, which didn't help my social life. I'd be at boarding school, and then I'd go to Germany where there wasn't a lot going on where we lived. So I think that I really lacked social skills, just ordinary, everyday social skills. And I think that I threw myself into the hedonistic side of socializing head first, in that I don't think I really knew how to relax in a social environment unless I was drinking. From about the age of 15, 16, I had started sneaking out of Radley to go into Oxford to meet friends from, outside the school, largely because my housemaster didn't trust me, hadn't trusted me to go into Oxford for the first 2 or 3 years of my school, because he thought I was going to go and drink. I hadn't really been terribly interested in drinking. I'd sipped a Pimm's or something by the time I was 14, 15. But he made such a fuss about it that eventually I just started going into town, and that would be the best time I had, because I wasn't looking over my shoulder for anything other than the teacher. And normally we'd find a quiet little corner where no teacher could see if they happened to come into a pub. So I relaxed. I smoked tabs. Bought a packet of 10 silk cut, got myself a pint of Carling or Foster's or whatever we were drinking there, Hofmeister, and then for 3 hours I just forget about everything. So when I left school altogether and moved into university, I was out every night, and that continued into my career. I don't think my education, I don't think that shaped my career in any particularly large sense, apart from the fact that it had given me the opportunity to learn how to play some instruments. And at Horace Hill, they had sort of reinforced a love of classical music that I'd grown up with, because of my parents' enthusiasm. But I think I'd have gone to music anyway. I think that was in my blood. So I don't think the school did that. And, my school, Radley were the people who told me not to play in my rock band, instead of singing. I wanted to leave the choir, and they're like, no, you should leave your rock band. So they hadn't done much to encourage those kinds of things. But, I left that school in 1989. It's 2025. I've worked in music, since 1994, and arguably since 1990, when I arrived at university and started writing record reviews. So I don't think that they shaped my career at all. I think they would have discouraged the idea of me going into, bang crash music or whatever they would want to call it.
Thank you, Wyndham. Yeah, we'll come on to music next, because it is so important in your story and your life. So important for me as well. We've connected a few times over kind of what we were listening to back then. But just to reference really the drinking part, and yeah, for me, that until 4 years ago when I quit drinking, that was all I had really to hang on to. I had music and drinking all my life, and I had kind of big, angry, explosive music plus drinking equals I was able to get in touch with a lot of anger, a lot of emotions, get stuff out. Then there was sad, melancholic, sort of blues and classical stuff where I just it was the only thing that made me cry. So I could cry again, and yeah, between the booze and the music, I look back at it now. I don't judge myself for that because it's all I had. And yeah, I really damaged myself over the years with it, and damaged the world around me in many ways with it. But it's all I knew, and like you, I started young, found it young.
Yeah. And, you know, and I still drink today, and I probably drink too much. Well, I do drink too much, full stop. But I am luckily not somebody who staggers home every night, you know, unable to unlock the front door. I just have a tendency not to stick to the idea of, I don't know, 2 pints good, 3 pints bad. You know, if I'm having fun, I'm going to go on for as long as we're having fun talking, or I can't talk, um, because it's great fun. And when I'm working, I have a very intense work ethic, also inherited from my education, and so these sort of two extremes have to balance one another out. But it is a constant, you know, it's a constant worry for me that I've stayed the last 3 nights in at home, and you know, it's you get to the third night, you know, I haven't seen anyone for 3 days. Well, that's because you're trying not to drink. Can't you just see anyone anyway? No, 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 no. I've got a drink. I can't just do anything else. Come on. Oh, I suppose I could go for a walk. Not in the evening.
Mm.
Yeah, let's go to the pub.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I really deeply resonate with that, Wyndham. So thank you for sharing and your honesty. So moving to music, then, you know, music, it's been your life, your work. So just talk to us a little bit about, yeah, particularly some of that music that was so important to you that from the early years that as you revisited it as an adult, really helped you start unpacking things.
Yeah. I it was in 2020 that I started really looking into what had happened to me as a child seriously. I think the circumstances of the pandemic, as anyone who went to boarding school will know, were very familiar. This idea of being locked away, unfamiliar rules, cut off from the people you love. And I realized after a couple of months that I wasn't dealing with it in the mature, you know, boarding school manner that I thought, that actually I was completely freaking out. I was just talking to myself so much for starters. You know, I kept on adopting a Manuel from Faulty Towers accent as I was writing you know, a shopping list. It'd be like, "And pepperoni, I need asparagus," because I had nothing else to talk about. And I realized I was kind of losing my mind, and that this was definitely connected to what was going on. And I started to think it was a coincidence to begin with. There was a record that I put on one day, and it was just full of lyrics which I could apply to boarding school. And that was the same day that Dominic Cummings had lied to the nation in the Rose Garden about going up to Durham, a press conference which ultimately had made me sick. Like literally, I threw up afterwards. And at that point, I felt like, you know, if somebody involved in politics has literally made you throw up, probably needs to ask some questions. And then later on, I put on a record. It had these references. And it was a record I'd listened to in the very last month I was at Radley. It was a band called the Snapdragons, record called Dawn Raids on Morality. Hardly anyone knows it, but this moved me. Like I could feel this anger within me hearing these lyrics, and not as in these lyrics were provoking the anger. I could feel these echoes of what I had felt as a 17-year-old. And this struck me as very, very informative, because normally when one listens to music, you know, one takes out of the music what one finds in it. That's why we connect to a record. It speaks to us in some way. But what I don't think I'd ever realized before was that I had invested in these records as a young man, young boy. I had invested myself in these records, and I hadn't listened to them for many years, a lot of them, but and certainly not in this frame of mind, provoked by Dominic Cummings. But when I put those records on, I realized they held secrets. Like there was a reason why a certain song had resonated with me when I was 17, say. There was a line on one of the songs, "The state of the art is the art of the state." I mean, it's not a particularly subtle slogan, but I recall that, you know, I could have written that on a t-shirt. Um, and it would probably have been confiscated from me at Radley had I done so as well. So I started listening to more and more music and that I had loved as a child, and started to question, why does this song move me? Why does this melody grab me? What is it about that line that spoke to me? And I would discover, like, well, a code. There was a code, you know. I mean, I could even listen to a Frankie Goes to Hollywood record, and I put on Two Tribes, and I suddenly remembered, like, you know, when two tribes go to war, one is all that you can score. That had spoken to me as a 13-year-old child, and just the sheer futility of the confrontations going on around me, or with me and other people. Like, you know, what is the point of this? This is not necessary. We don't need to do any of this. And so, yeah, the more I dug into those records, I realized how much of a lifeline music had been to me as a child, in that I had taken out of that music and put into it. And if I really wanted to understand myself as a child, now that I was an adult, I should spend a lot of time paying really close attention to this, because those records had been a lifeline to me. They had articulated the things that I couldn't articulate to others. They had articulated things to me that I couldn't even understand for myself. And then I would go, bing. And sometimes I would, you know, invent meaning for these lyrics. You know, there are songs which had nothing to do with what they became to me, but they still really meant that to me. And if I could dig into that, then I would see what I was like as a child, and why I could understand myself better now. Like, what survival strategies I'd adopted, what I had been trying to survive in the first place. And yeah, music became, yeah, I mean, it's always been the most reliable friend I've ever had. And it is one that, you know, it turns out I've been having conversations with since probably the first time I heard, I don't know, Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, or Saint-Saëns' Carnival of the Animals, you know, whatever it was my mother played me, Scott Joplin. I bought a Scott Joplin collection recently, the very same one that she used to play on her piano. And immediately, you know, I'm just sitting at her feet again. And I remember how much I worshipped my mother as a young boy. Like, because I can hear that song, and suddenly I feel that piece of music, and I can hear the joy in it that I associated with her. So yeah, that's music was vital to me as a child, and it's been vital to what I sort of, I guess you could call, my recovery the last few years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Wendell. Really moving. I mean, for me, I'm resonating with it because music was like that for me, and it still is. Right the way back to the start, and said there was a music for everything. So effectively for me, there was a medicine for everything that I was dealing with at the time, and now, you know, been on a real kind of intense healing journey, if you want to call it, for the last 4 years. Some of the stuff that soothed me all my life, I can see from the outside. I can see it as a piece of music now. I'm not in it. It doesn't hold me anymore. I can just enjoy it for what it is. It's almost like the energy that it held has been released in some way. You know, for me, one of my, you know, a band that I was massive into when my mum was sick and dying when I was an early teenager. My drinking was already then at 14, starting to get out of control. The drugs were coming in, and I got massively into a band called Therapy. You know, pretty hard line band from Northern Ireland who'd grown up in shitty circumstances, and were off the rails with booze and drugs, and you know, everything they wrote spoke to me. I went to a gig recently, looked at it from the outside, having done a lot of this stuff. I was like, I still get it, but I didn't feel it like I had done for the last sort of 30 years. I just loved it for what it was, a piece of music, part in time. So thank you so much for sharing that.
I just wanted to add one other thing about music, by the way, which was why I think it's so valuable to so many of us who went through school. Like, you can't see music. You can't confiscate music if you can't see it. And music, you don't even need to have like a cassette deck as we did. It was in here. You could always hear it. And they couldn't take it out of your head. And you can't really say that about many things at a strict boarding school. You know, even if they confiscated my stereo, you know what? I could still hear the Smiths, the Cure, whatever, Frankie. I could still hear them, and I can still hear them right now. So they'll never take that away from us. Music is a great gift. It's just vibrating air, but it's an incredible gift.
Oh, it's beautiful. Well, thank you. Yeah, I went straight back there to about 10 or 11 years old. Yeah, being in bed on a Friday night listening to the rock show with Tommy Vance, I think it was, and they broadcast Metallica live at the Milton Keynes Bowl on a Friday night, and I was in bed angry. Should have been somewhere. I should have been at home. Something had gone wrong at school, and then I heard that for the first time. I was like, okay, this makes me feel like this sounds like what I feel.
Yeah, it's funny though, because I invested in musicians this idea almost that they were godlike. They were different to me. They were a cut above. I would never breathe the same air as these people who could articulate all of these things that I never could. And I was lucky enough, when my first book came out, to meet one of my musical heroes from my time at Radley, who'd also published a book at the same publisher, a guy called Mike Scott, who sang for it still is basically the band The Waterboys. Their album "This Is the Sea" was like, one of the ones which sort of broadened my imaginative horizons. I could listen to that and I was just in a different world. And I said to him, like, it's amazing for me to meet you. Do you ever get that feeling when perhaps you've met some of the stars you looked up to when you were growing up, and you get to meet them now because you're a successful musician? Don't you get that feeling like it's like you're meeting a god? And he just looked at me and went, "No, that's a bit weird. It's a bit sad, actually. I'm just a guy." And that broke a spell for me in a magical way, because suddenly it allowed me to, I don't know, communicate with music in a new way, and not feel like it was, beyond me. But that was also, a symptom of going to a school in which you were cut off from normality. There was no way I was ever going to be able to. Well, I couldn't go and see concerts during term time at the best of times, and I was certainly never going to meet these musicians. I mean, what would Mike Scott of the Waterboys want to do with a posh boy from Radley? It's never going to happen. Never going to happen.
No,
But anyway,
thank
yes.
you. Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, you touched on something there which I'd like to segue into, which is um, the kind of you've referenced it before in your language, the cult-like status of the schools, and you talked a bit about there was a very deliberate severing and a very deliberately sort of harsh environment to sort of break you and make you. You've talked about how strict it could be, how things could be taken away, the ranking, constant ranking, and the putting down of people as a sort of control method. So speak to the sort of cult-like status a little bit so we can understand that.
I think the easiest way to explain it is if you were to speak to somebody and say, "Yeah, I grew up in a place that was cut off from the rest of the world. I was only allowed to see my parents under certain circumstances. I had to attend religious services twice a day, every day. I had to answer to a leader who I had not elected, who surrounded himself with other people who carried out his whims. There were events taking place that were definitely not right, but they were brushed under the carpet. Those are, that's a perfect description of a cult. I mean, if you watch a Netflix documentary about a cult, then try applying it to a boarding school, and you'll see it's pretty much an exact fit. You are inculcated with a number of beliefs that will shape your entire existence. Fundamentally, one of them for me at a young age was, you are here to become leaders of men. That's an extraordinary thing to be told as well as I was just 13. That's a cult-like thing to be told. And it was starting to see the similarities between the cults that I was reading about from time to time and the Netflix documentaries that keep coming up. Oh, another month, another cult. It was that sort of opened my eyes to that, and it also allowed me to forgive my parents for sending me away, because I always knew they were trying to do the best thing for me, but I had given them indications that things were going very, very badly for me. And they had inclined themselves towards trust in the school rather than a young child, which again, I understand, but it was the cult idea that got me to fully understand maybe what they had been thinking when they sent me there, which is that they were thinking what the cult had taught them to think. They had been through the same system, and they had maybe not struggled in the same way as I had, or if they had dealt with it better, or in, yeah, whatever. So it's a lot easier to understand what they're doing and what you've gone through once you start to think about it as a cult. Then you understand you need to deprogram. My parents hadn't deprogrammed. They felt, we're going to put him into the, you know, it's a different cult branch to the one we went to. It's a much better one. They say it's the best cult branch around at the moment. You know, one of the top 5 cult branches in the country. You know, so then, you know, then I understood. I came out, they didn't know any better. They weren't deprogrammed. And I have spent the last 5 years essentially going through a program, you know, through a system of deprogramming myself, of trying to rewire the bits that don't make sense, the bits that don't serve me, the habits I learned which are destructive to an adult, and yeah, not doing them anymore. But you know, you don't. It's like quitting smoking. You can't just go, "Oh, I want to quit smoking." That's it. Awesome. You know, it's very much part of you. So this idea of it being a cult, I think, is very, very important. And I think it also explains why people behave the way they do about these schools. Because if you look at all these documentaries about cults, there's always this wariness. It's like, well, you know, they're allowed to believe what they believe. You know, we shouldn't criticize somebody for their religion. Really? Shouldn't you? Shouldn't you? I mean, if they're molesting small children and taking on 6 wives and locking up 2 of them because they won't have sex together, you maybe should be looking at them. It's a cult. It's wrong. But we don't, we just give it this sort of air of respectability because we all speak like Hugh Grant or Laurence Olivier when we emerge from it. And then many of us go on and you know, have financially successful careers and procreate and you know, provide more children for the system to inculcate. So I just think that if people were to start thinking of boarding school as an inescapable environment, in which, you know, inescapable in that you can't even escape its thinking patterns, then maybe we could have a slightly more healthy debate about what these things are actually for and how perhaps they could change for the better. I'm not somebody who demands that all boarding schools close down. I think that choice is important. I think there are circumstances where maybe it is helpful to send a child away. But I do think at the age of 8, to send a child away is completely wrong. And if we were to start thinking of the age of, you know, sending children away at the age of 8 to a boarding school away from their children as not entirely dissimilar to putting a child on a slab of rock when the sun comes out and slaughtering it so that it, you know, it rains during the summer and keeps the harvest healthy. I mean, it's not that much different to me. It's just not that much different to me. It's a cult.
Thank you. Yeah, very powerful words. And I think that the blind spots we've got, Fred, that you've mentioned before when we were communicating about the podcast, the blind spots that we've got for it culturally, within families, you know, within the world, because obviously it's, you know, you speak to most people. I mean, I know that you live in Germany, and you speak to I was with a friend I connected with from my secondary school, and for the first time in, you know, 30 odd years, we caught up. He's married to a German woman, and we were talking about our time at boarding school, and she's just sat there, and you know, the jaw is sort of hanging open, and she's. I won't do the accent because it will not come across well. It will not come across well. But she just said, "Why? Why would you have children to send them away? You're going to hurt them." With her exact words. And I thought, yeah. And you speak to people from other parts of the world that we haven't sort of shipped this business model to via the empire, if you like, and they are in absolute disbelief that it is possible.
It's funny because, I mean, as I say, I only really started awakening to the reality of what I'd experienced, you know, over the last 5 years or so. And it kind of highlights how much I was still a part of the cult. To think that I think it was maybe about 15 years ago, I was in Oslo, and I I would crack jokes about boarding school and tell stories all the time about, the strange teacher who tried to kiss me in my bed and things like this. And they were creepy stories. And one person I remember was sitting with us, and for whatever reason hadn't heard the start of the particular story I was telling, and said to me, "Sorry, what was this?" And I said, "Oh, I got sent away to school at 8." He said, "What do you mean sent away?" I said, "Oh, I went to a boarding school." He said, "You didn't see your parents?" I said, "No, not normally for like 3 or 4 weeks." He said, "What had you done wrong?" Like, in his mind, the only reason that you do that is punishment. But that's a blind spot in Britain. That's a blind spot. Like, it's a blind spot that not only, well, it's a blind spot that also allows us to think that it's a privilege. Like, it's not just something we don't see. It's something we have literally transformed to suit our beliefs. There's no way it's a privilege to be separated from your children under the age of 8, even if you've got a golf course. It's just not a privilege. It is a trauma.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Wyndham. I hear that. Yeah, I hear that. And so to sort of with the kind of cult-like status, the need for the cult, the institution, if you like, in your words, to sort of protect itself, to look after itself. There tends to be we know that there's been the closing of ranks, the sweeping of things under the carpet. Abusers, for instance, were moved on from school to school with a quiet reference and went about their business. Without full effective mandatory reporting, still we're in a boat where we're still not able to really do that. We can't do it through the DBS system. We know that. So there's still a big gap here. Now with the institutions themselves, you have been very vocal about your your legal cases, and the way that the schools are dealing with non-recent claims of abuse. What's your feeling on kind of how they approach these things, and what should they be doing?
I think my feeling could be summed up very easily. What the hell are you thinking? Like, really, what are you thinking? Like, you can't cover this up forever. So why, now that we seem to be seeing more and more of these cases, why don't you try and get ahead of it? Instead of just playing constant catch up using the survival strategies that you learnt in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever. Why can't you get ahead of it, put your hands up and say, awful things happened that should never have happened. Those were different times, but that does not excuse it. And we are deeply, deeply sorry for the lives that suffered due to our neglect and failings. This cannot be allowed to continue, and we will never allow it to take place again. That is not hard. People say that sorry is the hardest word, but I'll tell you what, it might be hard to say, but it's even harder not to hear. So I don't really understand why schools won't get ahead of this. Instead, they are constantly playing the same kind of games that they've played for years and years and years and years, and causing yet more misery to those of us who suffered. They close ranks. They do not want to acknowledge it. Even one school will not acknowledge it, that it took place at another school. They just sort of, oh, well, yeah, we don't really talk about that. That was a bad apple, just a bad apple. That would never happen here. Well, how can you be sure? Because it happened there. So I think that there is they've got the balance wrong. They're trying to protect themselves. I understand their reputation is very important to them. This is a tricky time for these schools as well, because, the parents now paying VAT. Charitable status is under threat, although I'm not sure how much charity they actually show, especially to those of us who've suffered. But just try and save your schools by saying sorry, because then we might admire you. We might actually stop being so angry and let you go back to doing your thing, slightly more secure in the knowledge that we're not going to be triggered tomorrow by yet another story of abuse that you as a school tried to claim never happened. And it breaks my heart every time I read another story, because you read another story every week of yet another teacher who was moved on from one school to another. I watched the Grenfell documentary on Netflix 2 nights ago. The first night it came out, it's exactly the same. And the fascinating thing about that is Grenfell was in Kensington, Kensington being one of the wealthiest, also poorest boroughs in London. But Kensington is clearly staffed by a lot of people who went to private schools. And you see how they handled not only the aftermath of the Grenfell fire, but you see how they handled things that led up to the Grenfell fire. And you see it's the same idea of, like, look, just don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Just don't talk about it. Don't let anyone know, okay? It'll go away. We'll make sure they don't talk about it as well. It's the same mechanism. And everybody enables the people around them by failing to confront the problems within a system. So I would, I don't like to compare boarding schools in Grenfell, but they are provoking the same protection of reputations at the extent of safety. And that is, it's not just about boarding schools, it's just a widespread problem in British culture, and I think in Western European culture. I don't think this is exclusive to Britain. It's just that we have a system in boarding schools which is literally there in order to preserve that mentality.
Thank you, Wyndham. Yeah, thank you so much. It strikes me thinking of the journalist Alex Renton's words that we're a nation addicted to cover up, and I think Dino Nocivelli, the abuse and human rights lawyer, he was saying on something I saw the other day where he was just going through the number of cover-ups and scandals that have been sort of outed in recent years, whether it's Scouts, blood, church, post office. He's just reeling them off one by one by one by one. Harrods, and it's like, my God, you can then see it. This sort of nation addicted to cover up, get behind the lawyers and the insurers, kind of quietly make it all go away, diminish and gaslight the victims, and kind of move on. We're still seeing it every single day at Seen and Heard. People come who are, in complaints with their schools and institutions, and very few of the schools are taking a victim-centred approach. And that victim-centred approach is actually advocated by the British Association of Insurers. So what's really odd is there's this sort of what's being said and what's being done, and ultimately we know that it's what's being done that is the measure of people, and not what they're saying. So I really hear you, and I think back to my business life, the last sort of my career until now. I was like, do these schools not have a PR firm? Because in a corporate, when we used to get something wrong, like there was a product recall, something had been faulty, someone had got hurt, someone had got sick, or something like that. The PR firm would be like, shit, get out ahead of this, right? You get out ahead, you apologize, you make sure that anyone else affected, you put a public notice out for anyone affected by the same issue, get them all together, deal with it quickly, noisily, publicly, say sorry, learn from the mistakes, move on. That's what we would be told in a business, but I'm surprised no one's given them better advice.
It is an extraordinary thing. It is an extraordinary thing. And each school that I see that decides, you know what, we're going to take this to court, I do think why. I mean, I understand that maybe you don't believe it, but when there's a whole bunch of people lining up and all saying the same thing, people who haven't spoken to each other for 30 years because they had such a terrible time at that school and they've never ever wanted to think about it again until it became impossible not to think about. I mean, I don't know. It's a mystery to me why this mentality remains the way it does. It's a mystery to me. Just get ahead of it, apologize. Don't make it worse for yourselves. Don't go to court. I mean, if you have to go to court, if you've really got problems believing somebody, all right, yeah, I get that. That's fine. But, don't go to court unless you have to, because you're going to be in every newspaper. And by God, it's a bad look. People already think you are entitled and arrogant. Maybe try and prove them wrong by not acting in an arrogant and entitled way and just going, we're really sorry. We shouldn't have done that. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the worst one I tend to hear now is it wasn't done on our watch. Sometimes they've even changed the company name 4 times to get away from the stuff. Well, that was the last lot, bad apples, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I hear you, and thank you for your really passionate words there. I hope it starts to get out there. And as we start to sort of come to the end of our time together today, because I know things were interesting, we could keep going. But we were touching on, we mentioned earlier sort of mandatory reporting. And I know we've communicated around the independent inquiry into child sex abuse and what needs to change, and some of the campaigning stuff that we do. But the media is very much, dominated at the moment by kind of the words grooming gangs. And, whilst in some ways, Elon Musk getting involved around and politicizing and racializing the whole thing did give the government a kick up the backside to sort of start to get on with some stuff. And I recognize that. It's a very unhelpful and unhealthy kind of conversation to politicize and racialize it. So I know you're passionate about this area. Have you got thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, all child abuse is wrong. So when I criticize the likes of, say, Rupert Lowe for focusing on Pakistani grooming gangs, it's not that I don't think that the grooming gangs were wrong. The grooming gangs were absolutely horrifying. They are appalling. They should never have happened. They should have been investigated more closely at the time. But you know what? There's a whole lot of grooming gangs that are white that have also been investigated and found guilty. And I'm not seeing people talking about the great success of having put these people away. I think there was a case only last week of about 12 white people put away. And you know what? I'll tell you where there's also grooming gangs. There's grooming gangs in boarding schools. Well, there certainly were grooming gangs in boarding schools, widespread grooming gangs. And they weren't just in like one boarding school. They were passing the gangs around. If one, member of a gang got caught, yeah, bad luck, mate. But don't worry, we're going to 100 miles away. They're looking for a history teacher. We got you. That's a grooming gang. So why is this not important? Especially, why is this not important to a large number of politicians in the Conservative Party, frankly, who went to these schools and saw it happening and will have known it and may have even suffered their own abuse? Why are you not talking about this as well? We've done the church, we've done the Catholic Church, we've done the Scouts, we've done Pakistani grooming gangs. Why are we not talking about the boarding school stuff that you saw? I mean, Boris Johnson didn't want to even spaff money up the wall, but he was at Ashdown House, and the idea that the school where Alex Renton saw such appalling things taking place and so many other pupils suffered, the idea he didn't see any of it. Really? I don't understand how that can be. So why is it that you don't want to talk about this? Why are we not worthy of it? Is it because we're privileged? Is it because we had a golf course at our schools that our sexual abuse doesn't count? Am I not worthy of anything because I talk like Laurence Olivier? Are you not worthy of support because you went to a boarding school and you weren't molested by a non-white person? It's an appalling thing. Sexual abuse should not happen to any child of any color, should not be done by anybody of any color. Sexual abuse for a child of an adult. Let's look at it all and let's not pretend that it's not widespread across every part of society. And if you want to say that Pakistani culture or Indian culture, because let's face it, people who are racist would just mix these countries together. If you want to say that that's in their culture and that's why we need to watch out for them, by God, have a look at the boarding schools. They run the country. The people who come out of those schools shape the lives of everybody in Britain. So let's talk about how much they might have been damaged. Sorry, we weren't abused by somebody who wasn't white. Really sorry. But every time they racialize this debate, they are insulting all other victims of sexual and general abuse. And it breaks my heart.
Thank you, Wyndham. So passionate. It really speaks to me. Seeing Head, we sit on the Act on Exit group with the Survivors Trust, other members of the Survivors Trust and others. And obviously, 97% or something of all the other abuse, child sexual abuse, is nothing to do with, grooming gangs with any kind of, Pakistani grooming gangs or whatever sort of headline press stuff. And they're shouting at the moment saying, come on, this is happening in homes. This is happening in sports clubs. This is happening in institutions and scouts and the care system and all over the place. And all you're doing is, what, another inquiry? Really? Spent hundreds of millions on ICSA. We had 20 recommendations. Up until Elon Musk got involved, none had been done for 2 years. Now we've got a couple in train that are watered down. It's like, and we're going for another inquiry. Right, brilliant. Okay. It just keeps the lawyers happy, it keeps the press off the politicians back for another couple of years until they can change government again. So, we have
the can down the road, and let's see how many more children's abuse we can cover up.
Yeah, it's a shit show, and it has to change. Ultimately, the way we look after our young people and we perceive our young people in this country is very poor, and it needs to change. And seen and heard came from that, that children shouldn't be seen and heard, that expression. For me, when I looked at what to call what we're doing, I was like, that's it, because young people need to be seen and heard, and adults who have suffered need to be seen and heard. And basically, it just has to be a universal human right. And that moment at which you are truly seen and heard for who you are, not the mask, not the stuff you're told to be. It's like you connect to something far greater than yourself. But very passionate about this, and I thank you for your passionate work in this area. You've done a lot for other people who've suffered at the schools, and your articulate words around this have helped to give voice for a lot of people to basically hear what's going on in their heads. I thank you, and also for the conversation about music and inspiring me to go back and have a look at a few more records and see what's in the closet, what's lurking in there. But as we finish off today, Wyndham, a huge thanks to you. Is there anything you just want to finish with?
I'd like to thank you again for all the support that you've offered to people, and I would just encourage anybody who has been to boarding school and something doesn't feel right, I would encourage them to look inside themselves and ask whether perhaps it's worth thinking about what lay at the bottom of that, and whether they can perhaps improve their life by examining it more closely. It's really, really hard to start that journey. Really hard. And what you'll find is going to make it even harder. But I can tell you from my own perspective that the rewards of the pain that I've endured, and endured sounds very melodramatic, but the rewards have been wonderful. I'm probably the happiest I have been since about 10 minutes before I arrived at Horace Hill.
Well, that's very, very beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Wyndham. We're going to finish there because there's nothing more to say after that. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your work in this area and for your honesty. And thank you to everyone for listening or watching. It's been the Seen and Heard podcast. We've had the pleasure of Wyndham Wallace's company today. So do please like, share, follow, look out for the next one, and really appreciate your time. So as Wyndham said, if there's something that feels like it needs looking at, it probably needs looking at. So good luck with that. And thank you, Wyndham. We'll see you again another time.
Thanks very much, Chris. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.